providing technical support, for them to go into agricultural activities, increase their productivity.
In the meantime, the National Orientation Agency, NOA, says the ugly trend of hate speeches must not be allowed to snowball into a crisis situation. Director General of the agency, Dr. Garba Abari, raised this concern in Abuja while briefing the media on what he described as the rising wave of hate messages in circulation in Nigeria. Timothy Yusuf reports that the agency says it is in possession of 3 recorded hate songs intended to be used as weapons to speech hate in communities.
Agitations by ethno-religious interests that have also led to illegal quit orders and the counter orders against one another and some communities. The National Orientation Agency has directed all state directorates and the community orientation and the mobilization officers to commence peace building, sensitization, and advocacy visits to settler communities to assure them of government's commitment to their safety and security.
The Director General, Nigerian Army Resource Center, Johnny Hamakin, has reiterated the commitment of the institution, being the think tank of the armed forces, to continue to build capacity and generate ideas towards defense and security matters of the nation. He stated this at the unveiling of the platform on donation of relief materials to victims of insurgency and fallen heroes by the Children Government of Nigeria in Abuja.
All for the time and zeal in coming together as a group for progress and provision of succor to the less privileged and our fallen heroes. These issues have undoubtedly been of historical significance and has contributed immensely in promoting civil-military relations which Nigeria projects a pride.
And as the anti-corruption war of the present administration rages on, the Nigerian Air Force says it is committed to ensuring a transparent and corrupt-free procurement process for its equipment. Chief of Air Staff Air Marshal Sadiq Abubakar stated this at a workshop in collaboration with Transparency International for procurement officers of the Air Force in Abuja. Defense correspondent Isaac Nkuma reports.
Since my assumption of office, the Nigerian Air Force has made stringent efforts to align itself with the anti-corruption posture of the current administration, requiring a strict observance of the national procurement policy.
This is a huge problem. It is a problem, a challenge facing the whole world, and we will be as effective in dealing with it as the least committed organization.
To a bit of politics now. The ruling All Progressives Congress, APC, has inaugurated a 24-member consultative committee to look into the issue of true federalism within the framework of the party's ideology. The committee has 9 APC governors as members, with Governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, as the chairman. Salihu Abdullahi reports that the national chairman of APC, John Oyegun, inaugurated the committee at the party's national secretariat, Abuja.
Without, of course, in any way sacrificing, jeopardizing, or threatening the fundamental unity of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
There are 12 issues. They range from views on state creation to regionalism, to revenue allocation, resource control, to land tenure. What do we need to discuss and tweak to have a balanced federation?
And that's the news. Good morning, Abuja continues with Blessing and Kingsley after the break. Good morning.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
I'm downloading is on 95%.
It's still on.
Eh?
Introducing Airtel Unlimited Data Plans. Get Unlimited 10 for 10,000 naira. Get Unlimited 15 for 15,000 naira. And Unlimited 20 for 20,000 naira. Unlimited data. Unlimited you.
Airtel, the smartphone network. Cadbury Bournvita now comes in an attractive new 500-gram refill pack. Simply open and reseal after use to retain the chocolatey and creamy taste. Cadbury Bournvita. Prepare to win.
If you just tuned in, the program is Good Morning Nigeria, showing live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. To the business reports, Nigeria's foreign exchange reserve hits 2-year high as experts say all-inclusive economic growth possible with steady and power supply for industries. Let's find out more details with Kolo on this as well as other stories.
Hello and welcome to Business News. Part of the composite components of government's Economic Recovery and Growth Plan ERGP is industrialization. Economic watchers say all-inclusive growth can be achieved with steady and eventually uninterrupted power supply, as industries thrive best when electricity is not in short supply. Alternative sources of power have recently received more attention to complement already existing structures. Solar power is one of such sources that stakeholders believe can complement the supply from the national grid.
I would tell you that as it stands today, beyond the inability of our industries to kickstart, even private residents are also suffering seriously. Recent statistics stands that about 17,000 megawatts of electricity is being daily generated from fossil fuel, from generators. The business of importing generators has continuously been at the top. When we burn diesel, what happens? The very scarce dollar is what we use to buy the diesel, and this diesel is produced by foreign countries. Foreigners are employed to produce this diesel. So we're using our little resources to import diesel and promote the development of other economies.
On the sides of industries that can be supported by solar power, he says,
we have different solar solutions from small and medium-scale enterprises to agro-industries, water pumping solutions and irrigation for farmers. These are all industries. And down to the bigger industries, yes, we can power an automobile industry.
And economic indicators are showing signs of economic recovery, as data from the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, indicates that the nation's foreign exchange reserve rose to $31.2 billion on Tuesday, the 8th of August, 2017. This is a 2-year high. It was $30.98 billion on the 4th of May, 2017, and has now reached $31.2 billion presently. This steady rise is buoyed by improved foreign exchange inflow, occasioned by increase in crude oil price, dollar inflow from foreign portfolio investors facilitated by the investors and export windows introduced in April, as well as reduction in dollar sale through CBN's forex intervention. According to the CBN, the reserve has risen by $890 million between July 7th and August 8th this year. The Naira, however, remained stable at 266 Naira to a dollar in the parallel market exchange rate. That's business news. Good Morning Nigeria continues shortly. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much, Kolo Mohammed. Up next, Good Morning Nigeria is a newspaper review.
All right, Bayo Toby, our newspaper reviewer, is here with us for today's edition, which is the last for the week. Bayo,
yes.
Home stretch for the week.
Yes, Friday is here. Good morning.
Morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Bayo.
Another wet night in the Federal Capital Territory.
Yes, it's been a little dry. Yes. And you see, for Abuja, when you have this successive wet, the native sense in the people of Abuja is that we are approaching what they call August break. And we are going to have 2 weeks of dry.
All right, so let's hope so. Let's hope so. Since the rainforest bed in the country, it's also been pounded by heavy rainfall. Now, there's a story that has come onto the front pages of the papers this morning, the question of President Muhammadu Buhari still being on medical vacation, as well as the reactions, those for and those against, as well as the APC and restructuring. Let's go to This Day newspaper, because that's the late story for This Day newspaper. This Day says, APC moves to reclaim restructuring, inaugurates El-Rufai committee, and has a rider panel to hold public hearing in 12 states. That's the APC committee that's panel to hold public hearing in 12 states. Now, below that, which is the second list story, it says, Dan Bazao, that's the Interior Minister, executive bill to curb hate speech on the way. It says federal government awaiting report on Ozobolo church massacre. Now, there's also a story with regard to the renewed attacks by Boko Haram. Many feared killed, 60 homes burnt in fresh Adamawa attack. That story is in greater detail on page 48. The photograph there shows with a caption, a reinvigorated PDP on the move. That's those are some of the members of the convention committee of the party, which hosts this weekend. Below the nameplate of This Day newspaper is a story of the budget. It says 2018 budget will be submitted to National Assembly in October. The federal government restates. That's on page 9 in greater detail. And above that, the story I talked about earlier has been come on to some of the front pages of the other papers. Presidency hails Senate for supporting Buhari's medical vacation. That's in greater detail on page 48. And of course, above that is on the Forex and the CBN and how much has attracted in 3 months. Just also for the independent newspaper, it's the lead story, as we indicated, federal government to protesters. Buhari asked for indefinite leave. And pro-president group says no basis for him to resign. That's first rider. Second rider says National Assembly has lost focus. And that's according to Fashion. That story is on page A4 in greater detail. The story on the Adamawa strike by alleged suspected Boko Haram terrorists is also there. Many feared killed and 60 houses burnt in fresh attack. We have other stories there that will come to. Blessing.
Yes, let's quickly look into the Nigerian pilot. On the front page, you find these stories. Leading for the Nigerian pilot this morning, Ozobolo massacre. 5 days after real cause of war revealed. The story is trending on page 20. There are 2 riders to that. How parties reneged on peace oath taking. Community desolate. Another rider, indigenes worry for the life of benefactor, Ikegwon. And you have there on the front page the photograph about the protest. Kingsley read from his own papers as well. Coalition for Good Governance and Change Initiative in a rally in support of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration in Nigeria. Some of the messages there is our president is recuperating, Nigeria is moving forward, no cause for alarm. Then just below that you have for another group, hashtag Mumu don't do. Nobody can derail anti-corruption war. That is for the other group. And this is coming from a president. There's a message to that. As pro-Buhari protests take over Abuja, Senate frowns at police action against anti-Buhari group. The story you find on page 12. But just above the leading headline for the Nigerian pilots stories there. Oshibaja, as acting president, approves appointment of 21 permanent secretaries. That story is on page 2. And still on page 2, the truth about power sector under Jonathan's administration. This is coming from Reno Omokri. Find out more details on page 2. Quickly now to the foot of the page. Mass sack, efficient service delivery, our goal is credited to Senate President Bukola Saraki. Another kidnappers den discovered in Lagos. More details you find on page 11. And the notice from Igbo Quit notice you have on page 9. ROI youth not speaking for North. Balarabe Musa is the one saying that. Why Nigeria should be restructured. Ghanaians and others have their word on page 11. Now to Friday leadership. Below the nameplate, you have alleged 3.3 billion naira health ministry vehicle scandal. EFCC orders petitioned. You'll find more details on page 6. Leading it for the leadership this morning, CSOs, that's civil society organizations, back President Muhammadu Buhari, insist he won't resign. With the two riders, Presidency hails Senate stands, says corruption fighting back. And it's also saying government won't bend. Find out more details on page 6.
Yes, blessing. The Coalition for Good Governance, civil society group, also countered the return or resign campaign about President Muhammadu Buhari. The special assistant to the president of media, Garbashi, who says that this return or resign is a subterfuge to frustrate the war against corruption. He said that the return and resign protests are a subterfuge and a bluff to those benefiting from the old order, and they want the old order to continue. He says the law does not give a time limit for the president to return, and therefore it cannot be imposed by any saber-rattling group that call themselves Resume or Resign. He says the initiative by the group is intended to frustrate the war against corruption. Meanwhile, the sad news coming is that Gulumbi was invaded by Boko Haram insurgents about 11 p.m. in the night, and for hours they burned down over 60 houses. Luckily, only one person were killed. Apparently, they were there to loot those houses for foodstuffs because probably they had fallen short of foodstuff from wherever they are hiding. But it must be pointed out that resurgent attack from insurgents is becoming very reoccurring in Madagali local government area, and is one of the local governments that are close to the fringes of Sambisa Forest. Meanwhile, there is an executive bill in the offing to curb hate speech. This was revealed by Minister of Interior, General Abraman Dambazao. This is to address the ongoing recklessness of vociferous and incendiary comments, some even by way of music that is going on in the nation and is critically putting the nation on the edge. Meanwhile, the acting president has told a retreat of ministers and heads of agencies that no more excuses. Deliver sustainable socio-economic development to Nigerians. He told a cabinet retreat at the State House yesterday that if you accept to be in the lab, you have to work diligently and accept to be locked in as long as it takes and iron what needs to be done. He says the tendency to give excuses for which is often described as Nigerian factor or exceptionalism is not accepted. Now he has declared, we will choose success. We must see to it that it works, and so the work now begins. They were looking at the economic recovery program and the 2018 budget.
All right, Bayo, thanks a lot. Just to take two other stories from the Independent before we take the punch. On the front page of the Independent, below the nameplate of Independent, says replacement for Danfo buses coming in 6 months, and that's according to Governor Ambode. That's on page A5. We're seeing likely to see the end of downfall buses as we used to need them bio. And blessing, of course. I think the Molwe is virtually off the streets now.
Exactly.
Molwe, the same way Bola Keja, you know. Bola Keja made its exit. So
and it literally means come down, let's fight.
Let's fight.
Yeah, Bola Keja. So it's gone. Downfall is it's also gone, and then Molwe is gone. And then Danfo is going. So that's on the front page of Independent. In 6 months' time, we'll see how it goes. But if you recall, there was a story we read from the front pages of some of the papers a couple of days ago, if not sometime last week, that some 70 or so members of academic staff of University of Maiduguri had resigned on account of insurgent attacks. Now, there's a story on page A7 by Independent, which says UNIMID debunks report of resignation of 70 lecturers.
In fact, the director of radio and publicity of the university debunked that. I said it is totally false. And nothing like that has happened. And so it was deliberate to set out frustrating students because the university is preparing to resume for the next academic session. We are, however, assured that initiatives have been put in place to further secure the university community. Yes.
All right, let's take very quickly the front page of Punch newspaper. Just one or two headlines from the Punch. If we see that an earpiece beside the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, if we have that on the screen right away, we'll take that straight away. And then, of course, we'll call it Why Saraki sacked 98 aides. That's according to a spokesman. That's details of that story, of course, can be found inside. And, of course, you have the other story. There's a story there in the middle of at the top page. It says, confusion as strange illness allegedly kills 70 in Kwara community. That's a story that, of course, we have to keep watch on. And then, of course, there are other stories in the bottom half of the paper. We don't have enough time to discuss those ones right away. Bayo Atoyebe, we hope you enjoy your weekend. Thank you for being here with us for today's review segment. All right, this is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. Remember, we have two topics to discuss: North Korea and the threat to global peace, plus the resurgence of Lassa fever. But we're beginning with Lassa fever. Let's take a break.
Now waiting be this. Smart gun over here. Don't fit it. Everybody want make I put them on top. You remember smart gun when I charge 100 naira, then go give me 800 naira. You don't upgrade. Now every end of the month, then go give me back all my recharge. Why don't recharge? As that time on us. From this one, no, we just jara. That now over jara back to sender.
Buy an Airtel SIM and get back all your recharges as data bonus by month end on Smart Connect.
Airtel, the smartphone network.
Chief. Good morning, sir. You're here already?
No. Now my spirit day, my body day for house. What kind of question is that? Were you not the one that fixed this meeting for 8 a.m.? You are now coming by 10 a.m. and start asking me job questions.
But Chief, now, I'm sorry. Don't you also go late for meetings sometimes? You know now, African time.
No more African time. And no more pancaking of face during office hours. At the end of the day, we will lose valuable time. We will not make progress. If we want to move this nation forward, we must treat business as business and respect time. Change begins with me.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry. Can we go for the meeting now, Chief?
Later.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
This week, your rib-cracking comedy, Professor John Bull, takes a swipe at how we think we belong among the human race while others do not belong.
Albinos, a hunchback, and everyone else in their category. Anywhere they enter, there's bad luck.
Simply because they possess certain genetic differences from the majority.
What do you want?
I want to buy banana.
Please go.
Why we all feel pain, joy, and human blood flows in all of us.
Rani Pepo went to your shop.
It's a restaurant.
Yeah. Any naming ceremony names you want to give to it. I does not care.
Keep a date with Professor John Bull in this episode titled Not One of Us.
So these people not give the work?
They said the post is no longer vacant.
Over and out. Brought to you by Glow.
The largest data network
Glow Unlimited.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. It's now time to take a look at Lassa fever, which is a first topic, by the way. But before we do that, here's Hamad Ambali's reports as put together for this resurgence in Lassa fever.
It wasn't long ago that medical experts applauded the successes recorded in reducing the number of states affected by Lassa fever in Nigeria from 20 states to about 9. Eventually, the disease beat a retreat, but apparently what health officials won was the battle. The war in the fight against Lassa fever seems not to be over. Between 9th June 2017, when a total of 501 suspected cases, including 104 deaths, were reported, and just last week when 2 persons died in Lagos, including a 36-year-old pregnant woman, not less than 100 different hospital workers who were exposed to the index case are currently under close observation at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital. In the wake of this new outbreak, health officials are observing what they term universal precautions in handling all suspected cases of this viral hemorrhagic fever. Officials of the Lagos State Ministry of Health and the Federal Ministry of Health are reported to be working to contain the latest Lassa fever outbreak by mobilizing human and material resources to trace the sources and extent of the disease, follow up on the potential contacts, identify early and test suspected cases. While these efforts are laudable, the question that comes to mind is why is the disease reportedly recurring after being tackled and reported over? The much talked about care which must be taken to avoid the spread of the disease in hospital settings now needs to be given top priority. Keeping rodents out of homes and food supplies, those who know say, will also help, but a holistic approach that includes increased enlightenment and awareness of the public on risk factors associated with spread of the disease is important for prevention. The current outbreak of Lassa fever in Nigeria is a wake-up call, and guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be critically analyzing the issues as Nigeria seeks to this time around win not only the war against Lassa fever, but stem further outbreaks of the disease.
Thank you very much, Ahmad Ambali, for that background report. Now we have 2 guests joining us from our Benin Network studios to discuss this issue in greater detail. First, we'd like to introduce Dennis Agbonlaho. He's a professor of medical microbiology and also former vice chancellor of Bruce Ali University, Ekpoma, also in Edo State. But at present, he's at the Lahore Research Laboratories and Medical Center that's at Ibuba Hill in the Edo State capital, where he researches into infectious diseases. Professor Agbonlaho, a pleasure to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Pleasure to be with you this morning.
All right, Blessing. We also have another guest who is seated with him there.
Yeah, sure. We have still with Benin Studio, Professor Silvanus Okogbenin. He is the Chief Medical Director, Irua Specialist Hospital at Edo State. Professor Okogbenin, thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Start off with Professor Agbonlaho. You were quoted to have said for the past 47 years, Nigeria made so much advocacy or noise, if we could use the word, in the name of creating awareness during Lassa fever outbreak. But seems to as if we have gone to sleep at the end of each episode, and which is with the latest outbreak. Were we caught napping again?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it is true that over the years, for the past, it should be 48 years now, every time we have outbreaks in this country, we start making noise and creating awareness, which is desirable. But once the outbreak is over, usually Nigeria goes to sleep. But I think that this time around, we should, as a nation, sustain this awareness throughout the year, because Lassa fever, the way it creates problem now, is like throughout the country, throughout the year, there are outbreaks actually. Whereas in those days it was only during the dry seasons, but today, throughout the year, we record outbreaks every year, and I think it's necessary for people to know the problems involved and then the precautions to take so that our people are not infected.
All right, well, stay with you, Professor Agbonlaha. You just made a point now, because we've had cause to discuss this issue on Good Morning Nigeria from time to time, where we've also had outbreaks. And the received wisdom was that, yes, you know, Lassa fever outbreak was common during the dry season. So why are we now in the thick of the rainy season also experiencing it, as we find in the Lagos area, where some fatalities have been recorded and a number of persons put under observation, if not quarantine already, at Luth?
Well, chances are that the carrier rats are multiplying and, of course, moving from one part of the country to the other. We, unfortunately, have not been able to carry out a real detailed survey of the prevalence of rodents that carry this deadly virus across the nation. But some studies we carried out recently show that even in 3 states, including Edo State, Delta State, and Bayelsa, the rodents are there. They are very few in Bayelsa, but they are so much prevalent in Edo State and Delta State. But we didn't have enough money to go around the entire nation, but we are planning to do so that we can know the distribution of the carrier rat, particularly Mastomys natalensis, which have been believed to be the main carrier rat over the years. Our findings also show that some other rodents may also be involved, not just Mastomys alone. So a lot of detailed research still needs to be done. But like the question you just asked, the outbreaks occur, you know, throughout the year these days. Perhaps because of the distribution of the rodents that carry it, and perhaps because of the multiplicity of these rodents in the country.
All right, Professor Agbonlaha, thank you very much. Let's join your colleague there, Professor Silvanus Okogbene, who is the CM, the Chief Medical Director of the ERA Specialist Hospital. Of course, ERA Specialist Hospital is also in Edo State, and there is a research center, the hospital, that deals with Lassa fever. What is it that we know about latest research or latest issues pertaining to what now appears to be recurrent outbreaks of Lassa fever in different parts of the country?
Thank you very much. The perspective I also want to say on this issue is I think the fact that awareness has been created, and also the fact that in Nigeria we can now make laboratory diagnosis, is one of the reasons why you may see that we are making more diagnosis and the incidents seem to be higher. Because I think with creation of awareness and the fact that we can make laboratory diagnosis is bringing up this upsurge. If you recall, previously, we had to take samples to South Africa and take samples to Germany to make diagnosis. In such instances, awareness too was very low in the country, and then it didn't seem as if the infection was there. But now that there's more awareness, there's laboratory diagnosis, I think we are catching them more often. And that probably also is part of why we can see throughout the seasons. Although it is more during the dry season, but now we also see it in the rainy season. I think it's also because of more awareness and the fact that we can make laboratory diagnosis in Nigeria.
Okay, all right, Professor Okogbene, still with you. Now, several states are still active. We might want to know where some of this activity are still prone, and if we'll get the number, then what other preventive measures are being done to actually help stem this, since it's going beyond its normal season?
I think, first of all, Lagos State is doing what they should do. They've been able to make the diagnosis. They've quarantined some people, and amongst those quarantined, they've been able to pick those who are infected early, and with treatment, I think they are going to get better. And if they continue in that state, this outbreak in Lagos, I think, is going to come down very soon. An important thing in battling Lassa fever is to ensure that when we can get vaccines, then people can get vaccinated on a large scale. Then we can begin to talk about wiping out Lassa fever. Otherwise, like Professor Agbolaho has said, the rodents are many, they are widespread, and so just working on the rodents alone may not remove Lassa fever. But if we have vaccines, then vaccines will be able to help in eradicating Lassa fever. And I can assure you that the Institute of Lassa Fever Research and Control in IRWA, in collaboration with some of our foreign partners, are working on vaccines. And if this becomes a success, then we can begin to talk about eradicating Lassa fever. Thank you.
Well, in terms of, still with you, Professor Okobene, in terms of working on Lassa fever vaccine, exactly where are we? Is it at the research stage? You know that some Germans were involved in that some years ago. Where exactly are we? Are we still walking around trying to get it, or samples are already being tested on willing persons who have stepped forward for the vaccines to be tested on them? And how many years are we, if we can project, away from getting a potent vaccine against Lassa fever?
Preliminary stages. Problems with vaccine for Lassa is the fact that there are several strains of the virus, and then to be able to get a vaccine that would address the various strains is a problem, but it's still at the preliminary stages. So we're still looking at what can come out of it in the next few years.
All right, thank you very much. Again, Professor Agbolaho, let's return to you. In this case, we understand that there are different strains, but what do we know? Maybe year on year, do we have different manifestations of the outbreak of Lassa fever? We know that medical personnel who themselves are exposed to patients who already have the virus, of course, can't contract it, as we have seen with the case of persons who have been quarantined at Lagos State University, at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital. So what do we know about the manifestation of the outbreak of Lassa fever year on year, season to season?
Thank you. Manifestations vary from person to person, actually. It's not specific, but there are various manifestations. The typical of this is the patient is usually very feverish, and it's accompanied with swelling of the face, sore throats, diarrhea, just various manifestations that mimic other fevers also. And that is why usually the clinicians and the nurses are usually affected, because initially they think it's like any other fever. But like I said, these manifestations may not be, these are typical manifestations that will vary from one patient or one individual to the other. But generally, there is fever, there is swelling of the face, there is sore throat. But the characteristic thing is that if the patient has diarrhea and is vomiting, it is usually blood-stained, and that is why the virus that causes it, that's Lassa virus, is said to be a member of the family. The disease itself is said to be hemorrhagic. It has to do with blood, and the vomitors, the feces, and the stools that is passed out is usually blood-stained, so it's hemorrhagic. That is typical. But like I said, the manifestation itself will vary from one individual to the other depending on your immune system and your ability to resist, infection naturally, as endowed by in you or on the individual by God, his creator. So you cannot say that what you see in one patient today is exactly what you are going to see in another patient tomorrow. Even during one particular outbreak in a given area, like what is happening in Lagos now, not all the patients will show the same type of symptoms, but usually there must be fever, there will be diarrhea in some cases, there will be swelling of the neck, there will be edema of those areas, and in fact, there could also be loss of hair, which is alopecia. There could also be deafness at the end of the day if the patient recovers. But about 15 to 20% of the patient, those who are hospitalized, about 5% usually die. And this is even more serious with pregnant women, where they may lose 80% of the pregnancy due to Lassa.
All right, Professor Agbala, yes, still with you. We know you're a member of the National Committee on Lassa Fever Control now. Apart from other measures that are already in place by different specialists, what exactly is the committee taking a look at to actually address some of these community challenges that is presenting itself?
Thank you very much. Well, the committee was set up, I think, early last year in Abuja. We had one major meeting. Between that time and now, I must confess to Nigerians that we have not had regular meetings. But I know that the Nigerian Center for Disease Control is doing very well on its own, particularly with the new management. We set out at that time and came up with a number of things we thought we should do to assist in controlling Lassa fever in this country. We also mapped out some research proposals that were submitted to the federal government. But I think that the usual thing is, what you hear from them after all these efforts is there's no money at the moment. They are looking for partners, foreign partners, to assist to fund some of these research efforts. But as a country, as a committee, we also identified some simple or simplified methodologies for rapidly diagnosing and confirming Lassa, apart from the facilities that we have at IRWA or at Lahore Research Center or in Lagos or in some other centers belonging to Nigerian Center for Disease Control, that those facilities are expensive, and they are only in about 6 centers in Nigeria today. Not the routine laboratories across the nation cannot readily diagnose Lassa fever because they don't have those facilities. However, this committee of ours decided to design some, simpler methodology that we can use to diagnose Lassa fever and deploy this technology to most Nigerian laboratories. The efforts are still on. In my own case in particular, I have some partners in Australia where we have developed what we call primers for the diagnosis of Lassa using simple kits. But we are at the second phase of the work now, trying to use the developed primers and kits and probes to see if we can confirm using known positive cases of, specimens in Nigeria here, to see whether those kits will work. If they do work as we expect, but this will take some time, then of course we'll deploy this technology to most of the labs across the nation. And because before in Lassa fever outbreak, people die because of lack of quick diagnosis. If we are able to diagnose as quickly as possible across the nation, rather than people sending specimens from Sokoto, from Maiduguri to Irua or to Lagos, we will deploy this technology to all parts of most of the clinical laboratories across the nation, and before you know it, within a day or two, they are able to confirm cases of Lassa, and then of course treatment will commence as quickly as possible. Fortunately, ribavirin is now available in this country that definitely kills the virus easily. So then of course there is awareness all over the country now about the correct management of Lassa cases in some of our hospitals, particularly at Irua. So a lot of people still send, unfortunately, cases to Irua. And when you look at the figures of Lassa cases in Nigeria today, you have a high rate of prevalence of Lassa, as it were, in Edo State. It is because there is a lot of people who are aware of the problem, particularly in Irua and in other parts of Edo. And like Professor Kebene said earlier, we have diagnostic centers. We are able to readily confirm cases of Lassa. And so a lot of people now rush to Edo when they suspect that they have a case of Lassa, just fever that cannot be taken care of with anti-malaria or antibiotics. Then they start suspecting Lassa, and they all rush to Edo State. So the result is that you have, we now record higher cases of Lassa fever, as it were, in Edo State. Otherwise, it is because, the reason is quite obvious. It's because there are people who are very knowledgeable about the management, particularly there in Irua, and then the laboratories are available for very quick diagnosis using this sophisticated equipment at Irua.
All right, Professor Agmolahal, thank you very much. Just to bring in Professor Silvano Sokubweni again into the conversation. Now, there's been a lot of reference to the Institute for Lassa Fever Research. Quite aside from what has been described as the sophisticated lab that you have for diagnosing Lassa fever, the Lassa virus, and then, of course, the preliminary stages that you have worked on with regard to the development of a vaccine. What else is the Institute be up to, in terms of treatment or whatever else is available for medical attention?
Well, only recently, 2 months ago, in collaboration with NDCD, we organized a training workshop for various centers in Nigeria, and we had participants from all states of the country, from various tertiary institutions, and were able to go through laboratory diagnosis, case management, and community interventions, so that in various states, at various tertiary hospitals, they can also respond to an outbreak of Lassa fever. Because sometimes when you're transporting patients from very far and they're very ill, they may succumb before they even get to the Irua Specialist Teaching Hospital. So it became apparent that with the widespread outbreak that can occur, that various health institutions should be able to respond to an outbreak of Lassa fever. And I'm happy to say that in many institutions now, they have isolation facilities. So even if they have to send blood for laboratory diagnosis and it's positive, within 24, 48 hours, they can get the results. And if they have isolation facility, they can begin to manage. And I'll also say that the NCDC have been very proactive in provision of laboratory reagents, in provision of the kits for prevention of nosocomial spread, and also in the provision of ribavirin. These are the things that help us in managing Lassa fever. And apart from that, we also have the mobile laboratory kits. In fact, 2 days ago, we received a new mobile laboratory kit which we can deploy to any part of the country that may need the laboratory kit to be able to make on-the-spot assessments. So in areas where they don't have laboratory diagnosis, and we think there's significant Lassa fever infection or any viral hemorrhagic fever infection for that matter, we are able to deploy a mobile laboratory kit to that facility, so they make their laboratory diagnosis there and can manage the outbreak. So emergency preparedness to a large extent is heightened. The support we receive from the Federal Ministry of Health and the NCDC helps us to prepare to be able to deploy equipment and manpower to areas where they may be needed. And I think those are some of the things that we have done in the recent past.
So, Professor Okegwini, still taking a look at other efforts to actually help curb and prevent this Lassa fever scourge moving faster than it should be now. What other areas of advocacy would you present for the community to actually take a look at?
What you're doing today is very good. You're educating the public, and people need to know that if there's that fever that is not responding to anti-malaria, that's not responding to antibiotics, then you should think Lassa. Physicians and doctors working in private hospitals, in public hospitals, need to also think Lassa. A high index of suspicion is major in ensuring that we curtail any outbreak. Doctors, nurses, health workers must have a high index of suspicion for Lassa fever. Once that is there, then it's usually very easy. Once you see the fever is not responding to common antibiotics, to common anti-malarials, then you should think Lassa. Like Professor Agbolaho said, the symptoms can be varied. It starts insidiously, just as if it will be malaria or typhoid fever, but it's not responding. And then you must begin to think of Lassa fever. Once you can do that, I think then the public can get safer. Like it's been demonstrated on this program, there's need to prevent rat-to-human contact. You talked about blocking holes by which rats come into the houses. You must be able to ensure that you cover your food properly. Food is well cooked, and then when patients are ill, they should be taken to facilities that have isolation capabilities, so that person-to-person transmission can also be curtailed. Remember that Lassa can also be transferred through the body fluids of one person to another, and that usually occurs a lot during outbreaks. So I think what you're doing, public enlightenment, high index of suspicion, good personal hygiene are very important in curtailing Lassa fever virus infection. Thank you.
Well, stay with you, Professor Okegwini. What do we know about the treatment regime? How costly is this? And is it readily available? And how long does it take?
For now, we're grateful to the Federal Ministry of Health and the NCDC. They ensure that we have constant supply of ribavirin. And like Professor Agbolaho said, it's very effective in the treatment of Lassa fever if you come early enough. If you come and you start treatment within 5-6 days, then almost always you can be treated successfully. Once the treatment is started, first you must have a laboratory diagnosis saying this is Lassa fever. Then the treatment is commenced immediately. In 1 week, 10 days, the test is repeated. By then, many patients are negative. Then the regimen is completed for about 10 days, and then the patient is tested again and perhaps ready to go home. Occasionally, you see some that may need longer treatment with ribavirin, but usually at the end of 10 days, they have completed the first round of ribavirin, and then they are observed to make sure that there are no other complications before they are discharged home.
Professor Okegbenimi, thank you very much. Professor Agbalan, gentlemen, will read through the tweet that have come in response to the discussion this morning. From Andrew of Borough East District. Good morning, all. Can we pay close attention to how we dispose waste? Can we budget for rat extermination like New York did?
All right, that's very important, but I don't think New York City has finally eliminated rats. I've seen rats on rail tracks in New York City. Now, that's Dele Jack Solomon. That's enlightenment and awareness of the public on risk factors associated with the spread of Lassa fever disease is important for prevention. Now, protective measures like good hygiene, environmental cleanliness, and rodents extermination should be put in place to reduce human infection.
From Nuruddin Ade Owolabi's district said, I smell a rat. Else, once it's eradicated, who pays for the remaining vaccines which someone is waiting to cash in millions or billions of naira?
Right, the vaccines are still being developed. That's what we understand. Yes. Mike Anyakwa tweets, says the relevant government agencies should do the needful and make sure that Lassa fever is finally exterminated in the country. Well, those are some of the reactions that we have from our viewers. We would like to express our appreciation again to the two professors who joined us from our Benin Network studios. Professor Dennis Agbolaha, Professor of Medical Microbiology, former Vice Chancellor of Ambrose Ali University, now in charge of Lahore Research Laboratories, as well as a member of the National Committee on Lassa Fever. Professor Agbolaha, as well as Professor Silvanus Okogbene, the CMD Area Specialist Hospital, both in Edo State. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so that does it for our first topic. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with North Korea and the threat, if any, it poses to the rest of the world. You're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you the network service of the NTA. We, of course, will be taking a look at North Korea, its ballistic missile test, as well as the heightened rhetoric between President Donald Trump as well as the leader of North Korea. Let's join our correspondent, Yemi Ajayi, for a background report as is prompt for the discussion this morning.
Best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
The statement by the United States President Donald Trump reacting to the threat by North Korea on her planned attack on Guam. Guam is an unincorporated United States territory in the Western Pacific Ocean. Spain had ceded Guam to the United States on December 10, 1898, and it is among the 17 non-self-governing territories of the United Nations. About 7,000 U.S. military have their presence in Guam, with Anderson Air Force Base in the north and Naval Base Guam in the south. North Korea military says it will develop a plan by mid-August to launch 4 intermediate-range missiles at the U.S. territory of Guam to be sanctioned by leader Kim Jong-un. South Korea's intelligence analysts have researched that the missile North Korea is talking about is capable of flying up to 5,000 kilometers, which makes Guam to be within striking range. This threat is coming after the UN Security Council adopted tougher sanctions against North Korea, led by Washington. The sanction is in response to the long-range missile test made by the Asian country. North Korea had also threatened a preemptive operation if the U.S. showed signs of provocation. As it is, the Trump administration considers North Korea to be America's greatest security threat, and tensions have continued to rise. There are also fears that this might lead to a world war as both countries concentrate on building more war arsenals, and especially with a scenario where both leaders are not ready to withdraw. Countries like China and Japan have, however, called on both parties to give room for dialogue.
All right, Emi Ajayi, thank you very much for that background report. Now we have guests with us in the studios as well as at our Lagos Network studio to discuss matters arising from that background report as well as what we know already in the public space. First, we'd like to welcome a familiar face. Good morning, Nigeria. Ambassador Joe Keshi, as a former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Keshi, I'm delighted that you're with us this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you.
Okay. Also have with us here Dr. Kyobob Manuel. Kyobob Manuel, a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me in your studio.
Okay. And from our Lagos Network studios, we've been joined, of course, by a researcher at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Charles Dokubo. Of course, he appears from time to time on Good Morning Nigeria. Professor Dokubo, a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's charity begin at home. Professor, we just had Professor Dokubo a moment ago, but let's begin with Ambassador Joe Keshi. The North Korean issue, it's been on for a while, and of course, since President Donald Trump assumed office in January, the rhetoric, of course, has gotten more ballistic, just as ballistic as the missiles being tested by North Korea from time to time. But is this really much of a global threat? Just that North Korea and then the spat that is having with Donald Trump? Should the rest of the world be concerned?
I really don't know whether the rest of the world should be that concerned. There has always been tension in the Korean Peninsula since the 50s. What we're experiencing from the current leadership or the leader in North Korea today is not too far away from what his grandfather did, what his father did. I think the only difference today is that the young man has escalated the quest for nuclear power, and you have in America a relatively inexperienced president as well, who likes to boast and who today is in need of something to continue to motivate his base. But when you look at the statements coming out from both sides, particularly from North Korea, you see that we are considerably far away from going into any war. The military release was that they are considering, and that when they finish, they will give it to the leader, to decide what to do. And it seems to me that when it gets to that state, the leader might just decide that it's not worth his efforts, because he knows the consequences. Whatever we see of the two characters, a Twitter-loving president, a young rabble-rouser with nuclear arms, the truth of the matter is that, at least from the North Korea perspective, I believe he's aware of the danger of having U.S. descend upon him. That would be the end of that regime to start with. The neighbors do not want such a crisis. Neither China, South Korea or Japan want such a destabilization in their region. And these are the reasons why I think that we are considerably far away from any major war.
Correct.
All right, thanks, Ambassador Keshi. Dr. Kyobo Manuel, you're listening to Ambassador Joe Keshi. Is it all just hot air rhetoric, or that we should actually be concerned?
From my, point of view, war can happen accidentally, as exemplified by what happened in 1962 during the Cuban Missile, crisis. The United States of America, a young President Kennedy, had, warned Russia, to behave, not to cross what strategists call the threshold. And it was so good that the Russians, turned back. There would have been an all-out, nuclear war between the East and the West. So accidentally, we can have a war. The bellicosity of the two, participants has not helped at all. I'm talking of Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. They've been very fiery. It's like, birds of the same, feather. So in that sort of atmosphere, we should be ready for anything. From my point of view, it's possible to have a war if the threshold is crossed.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kilbob Manuel. Now let's get to Lagos studio, where we have Professor Charles Tokobo. Now, amongst other areas of interest to you is that of nuclear proliferation. Now, are we just having this war of words, or there should be something else that we see to this escalation in the nuclear program coming from, or at least exchange between Washington and Pyongyang?
North Korea is a country that has acquired all refinement of nuclear capability. They have a nuclear weapon. They also have a launching system that will deliver these weapons to the target that they want. Now, some of these targets that we're talking about, they are just short targets that they could get into. But having nuclear weapon does not entirely mean that you can win a war. We must know that the United States is the largest, has the largest infantry of nuclear weapons in the world. But for North Korea, unless it's going to be a kamikaze attempt to fight against the United States. Because if you don't have the capacity for what we call a second strike, that's after absorbing the first strike, you cannot strike again. Because you have also positioned your nuclear weapons in what we call the triad, the land, air, and sea. Then it could be easy for a country to totally obliterate you. But we must also bear in mind all this talk about war and war. Nuclear weapons are not for war. They are for preventing war. Because in case of a nuclear war, the dead will envy the living will envy the death. So we have to be careful. But the type of brinksmanship that is taking place at the Korean Peninsula is said that it has brought to light the fear now, and that they believe that China could try as much as possible to couch the ambitions of North Korea. That is just that's just not possible, because this is a country that believes that they are threatened by the United States presence in South Korea. So we have to be careful about that, and that for them, nuclear weapon is a weapon of last resort. We have a young president who has just emerged after the death of his father, but then he also needs credibility from his people. Testing weapons only shows credibility, capability, and communication, telling your enemies that you have this weapon, and not just having this weapon, that you have tried it and it works. So there's also credibility in that side. So one has to be careful. This is a very dangerous period that we've come into. We don't know how it's going to blow out. You have a president of the United States whose word you cannot take for granted, who flips and flops anytime he likes. So these are the dangers that we face, the youngness and the irrational behavior of leaders. Deterrence is based on rationality. If these two leaders are not rational, then definitely the world should stand up and watch. China, on the other hand, although they've agreed and signed all UN sanctions against North Korea, you must also know that North Korea is a buffer for China, and that China will not just close all eyes and see that America obliterates North Korea. We just have to bear that in mind. It's just like Israel. Israel will it received most of the aid from the United States, and yet most times they turn against all U.S. even agreed resolutions. So we just have to be careful. These are difficult times, and we have to pay particular attention to the combatants in this area.
All right, Professor Dokubo, thank you very much. You again raised a number of points. Let's begin to break it down now. In terms of, I mean, you said we have to be careful. We don't know who the we are. Will not include us here. We will appear to be in the periphery, I believe, Professor Dokubo. But thanks a lot for the illumination that you have provided, as well as, of course, the other guests who are here with us in the studios. Now, in terms of real threat to global peace, when Ambassador Joe Keshi, you've talked about, the personalities of the two principal actors right on the stage at the moment, the young leader of North Korea, as well as the largely inexperienced, but septuagenarian president of the United States, Donald Trump. But there are some persons who say eccentricities. I mean, we saw what happened some months ago, just a few months after he came into office. President Donald Trump ordered the launch of some cruise missiles into Syria. After that, nothing happened. And now, of course, this bellicosity. It's also been seen on television that the fear, I don't know, from some flame, fury, or whatever that the world has never seen. Are we going back to Nagasaki? Then, the North Korean leader himself is also carried out, according to reports, summary executions of top government officials. So, should we be concerned about, should the world be concerned about the personality, eccentricities of these two leaders at the moment?
Absolutely. There's a need to be concerned about the two leaders in the United States and in Korea. But when you look at the facts on the ground, there are so many reasons why I believe, and I think so many people believe, that we are still far away from war. Number one, an attack on North Korea today will be disastrous to start with. It will lead to unforeseen consequences. And as Professor rightly pointed out, if you hit the first time, except you destroy the whole capability of North Korea, but if North Korea survives to, take out its own strike, it's probably going to destroy, either Japan or possibly Seoul, the capital of, which is within reach at any given time. And nobody, not in North Korea, I mean, not in South Korea or not in Japan, nobody wants that kind of thing to happen. So there are going to be some factors that are going to, at the end of the day, that are going to compel the leaders to take this decision. Number two, and that is very critical, we must not forget this. The leadership in North Korea is rational to the extent that he wants to survive. He is not going to be foolish enough to allow his country to be attacked, and his family and his team will completely lose power. So he's not going to do that. So I just think that, like his father, grandfather, and I keep making reference to this because you can actually look at what the past and see what is happening today. Like his father and grandfather, they just want recognition. They want to be recognized in their own right. And they see that given the antagonism that has been shown, particularly by the West, holding a nuclear power gives them that bargaining, becomes a bargaining chip for them. And so two things I'm saying. Number one, this guy does not want to lose power. He does not want to see the regime destroyed because it's going to affect his family and the rest of his cronies. On the other hand, there's Japan, there's South Korea. Even, look, one could say that South Korea, for example, will be happy if this regime is destroyed. But South Korea, despite the fact that South Korea wants a unification of the Koreans, South Korea wants absolutely a very, a very planned, well-arranged transition like the German, unification. Yes. Not a chaotic unification that will affect South Korea at the end of the day. So again, I make this prediction that the rhetorics will continue for a while, but at the end of the day, I believe that good reason will prevail. The United Nations has done the first thing. I think they need to go back to the drawing board because, again, China compelled the United Nations to remove some, like imposition of oil sanctions against, if they can bring back some of those things that would make the regime think twice at the United Nations level, I think it will be very helpful.
Are you contradicting yourself, Ambassador Keshi? China has an interest in North Korea. So why would China not be interested in North Korea surviving, and then China having a semblance
China pulled out the paragraph the item, because of its own, self-interest. China too doesn't want chaos in the
region.
In the region. So everybody has a vested interest, so to speak. But at the end of the day, my argument is that good reason will prevail, and we'll find it. Look, we did this a couple of years ago with his father. We did the same thing with his grandfather. So somewhere along the line, again, some negotiations will take place.
Yeah, right. So, Dr. Manuel, I'm sure beyond the sanctions, it's not the first time, of course, they've been receiving sanctions from time to time. And it will seem as if they're developing greater thick skin over it. Will this present sanction have any effects on North Korea?
I think Kim Jong-un is hell-bent on maintaining the status quo. There's a lot of bricksmanship in contemporary, strategy. You need to convince your opponent or a potential enemy that you are ready to do more than even what you have pledged, to do. So I don't see him reneging. I don't think, sanctions, will work. They are just hell-bent on getting the respect, they demand. America needs to have a dialogue with South Korea. Whichever way they can bring about that, they should endeavor to achieve that. But the brinksmanship will continue. But like I said earlier on, once the threshold is crossed, we should expect a major outburst. It's been used before in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. We must not forget in Hiroshima, about 76,000 people lost their lives, and that figure excludes those who are genetically mutated. In Nagasaki, we had over 100 deaths, 100,000 deaths. So it's serious, it's possible, but reason needs to prevail. Which way it will take, I'm not able to say right now.
Well, Dr. Bob Manuel, the Trump administration of the U.S. is saying, hey, listen, this is a time to act tough and teach an unforgettable lesson, as the president of the U.S. himself has been saying, on the basis that a number of his predecessors had tried engagement with North Korea, but that engagement failed. It's a peaceful engagement. You had Obama's efforts have been cited. Same with immediate predecessor to Obama, that's Bush the son. And of course, Bush the father also that this is the time to play tough. So rather than negotiate.
Yes, but I say again, it's the only way out. It will be very difficult to appease the South Korean, the North Korean leader. He's hell-bent on getting the respect he's been demanding from the United States, and indeed, from the outside world. They are somewhat ostracized, and they don't like that. They want to be seen as equal, partners in everything. So he will continue with his rhetorics, his saber-rattlings, his bellicosity, and the world, I think, right now should just watch out. We are at the edge of things. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Just before we come back to Ambassador Keshi, that's the point that we'll go back to Lagos. Professor Charles Dokubo. Professor Charles Dokubo, well, there have been frequent reports as to and we saw that also in our background report, as to the extent of the missiles that are in the possession of North Korea, that if it launches something, it could hit Guam, which is a U.S. territory where you have some 160,000 persons. 14 years ago, we also had this kind of allegation. We saw that we were told by Bush the son, who was president of the U.S., aided actively by Prime Minister Tony Blair of Great Britain, that there were weapons of mass destruction. Within 45 minutes or so, Saddam Hussein could scramble off those weapons, Israel will be obliterated, and so on and so forth. And then, the world was led into a war to change the regime in Iraq. Iraq has not been the same ever since. The area hasn't known any greater peace. Are there exaggerations as to the capacity and capability of North Korea, bearing in mind that some of the tests have actually failed miserably?
We'll just start from the last one. Most countries have experienced test failures. But the fact also remains that, at once you've acquired a nuclear capability, no country in the history of nuclear proliferation, no country has ever been attacked even after acquired nuclear weapons. So definitely, it is not about the numbers that matters. Anyone that penetrates your own place, your own country, will devastate that place. So what the international community will try to do is to make sure that this thing, this rhetoric dies down. Because at once a country has the capability, it also needs representation in the high places. North Korea has never been allowed. And if you look at the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was clearly stated that after 1972, any country that has exploded a nuclear weapon will not be regarded as a nuclear weapon state. And the United States has been saying for some time also that they are not going to allow a nuclear-armed North Korea. There is nothing they can do. They have to live and sleep with it. North Korea has acquired all the refinements that is needed, to have nuclear weapons. How do we contain it? For me, diplomacy is the way forward. You bring them back, let them be members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and also treat them as a nation, like you've accepted India and Pakistan. They've acquired this weapon and they are still living as neighbors. Nobody has gone. They've not forgotten that nuclear weapon is not just a big bomb that you can just display. It does not know a Christian, a Muslim, an atheist. When it comes, the blowback and everything that will come there will be so devastating. So what the international community is to do is to try as much as possible to lower down the heat and to make sure that these people meet and talk. That's the best way. Joy is better than war. They should just talk. And accord this small country its pride of place. It has worked hard. It has also, even during starvation and all that, you cannot take that from them. You cannot go and fight them. You just have to live with them. And then we don't need a lesson of nuclear prudency from the United States. They are the only country that have used nuclear weapons throughout the history of nuclear developments. What we have to do is that we just let President Trump know that there's nothing you can do with it. You will live with it because that's a country they've acquired everything. And that in spite of all sanctions that you've imposed on North Korea, they've tried as much as possible to do that. They know what they are living for. It's not only for regime security. It's for them a weapon of last resort. Look at the DMZ there. You have a lot of American troops there. So how can they not protect themselves? I am not against North Korea acquiring nuclear weapons. In fact, some theorists or strategists have said more is better if we all can deter our enemies. In Iraq, if you don't have weapons and you say you have it, they'll come out. The United States will form up a coalition and come to attack you. But if they know that you have also shown the testing of it, you have also shown the credibility that it has, then definitely you cannot. Because even if you can obliterate it, just one single nuclear weapon landing in a place that they want will destroy that country, in such a way that you will regret to having started the war. So we just have to be careful. America has more nuclear weapons than North Korea, but that does not give it all the rights or all the calculations that is going to obliterate that. In spite of that, you have nations, South Korea, you have China, Japan, you have Japan and all that. That place will not be peaceful for any person to live after exchange of nuclear weapons. So we have to be very careful.
Professor Charles Dokuba, thank you very much. Ambassador Joe Keshi, for some of the observers, they're on the lookout for what's the significant acts of North Korea's willingness to actually have this hardline determination. So, okay, we are here to declare this is what we have. But beyond that, the other threats are possible outlook to what has been described as, okay, this is what North Korea willingness to actually sell to some other nations that might be sponsors of terrorism across the world. Is that much threat for us again to watch out for?
No. Nuclear arsenals is not what you sell to terrorists who are not, based in one particular place to start with. We're not just talking of something like this that you can take across the border. Look, it's a huge system development thing that you really need a lot to be able to operate that kind of for terrorists who move around and who strike and run away, it's not something they can carry like a backpack and things like that. No, I don't think that's, you know, I don't think that, it's one of those things that the West says, you know, in order to justify its own position that others should not have, you know, nuclear, the technology. But I also want to contribute to the answer that my colleague here gave as to Donald Trump. Look, Donald Trump came to office criticizing virtually all his predecessors and made the promise that he's going to change things and he's going to bring new ideas. As of today, there are no new ideas on Donald Trump on anything. So basically, on every foreign policy issue, Donald Trump has virtually pursued the kind of policy that the Clintons, the Bushes, and of course the last President Obama. If you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Syria, if you look at Iraq, if you look at Israel, it's just been the same thing. So after all this rhetorics and boasting, and bear in mind that Donald Trump liked to use the language. In fact, in one of his books, he admitted that, look, listen, a little bit of exaggeration of things won't hurt anybody. So for everything Donald Trump's do, if it's even if even if he puts a new toilet in his bedroom, it's going to be the best toilet the world has seen. So we are looking at a situation where he's boasted again that whatever he's going to do in South Korea, it will be like what the world has not seen before. For goodness sake, you guys have just mentioned the dropping of the atomic weapon in 2 places in Japan. What else have we not seen in this world? So we've seen all these things. So for me, what I'm trying to say in effect is that, look, this is the boastful Donald Trump you are seeing. But at the end of the day, the policy makers, the level-headed policy, you know, advisors in Washington, like the Secretary of State is committed, Tillerson is committed to diplomacy. The defense chief himself, you know, the minister, the Secretary of State for Defense wants a negotiated settlement. At the end of the day, this is where we are going to end up with. But for the time being, the young man in this thing also wants some respectability. He wants the United States to recognize that, yes, we need this for our own protection. And as Prof rightly pointed out, nobody has ever used it since the end of, you know, but when you have it, it gives you that, the world recognizes your strength, that you have a nuclear armament and that you are, quote and unquote, if not a superpower at least.
You're a power.
You are a power.
Ambassador Keshi, thank you very much. But just one point, yes. I would like Dr. Kyo Bob Manuel to also speak to. Look, North Korea would appear to be isolated now on account of the rhetoric between the two leaders and what has been put on the global agenda through the media. Some months ago, Ambassador Keshi was on the set with us when we were discussing the seeming confusion around the world, trying to make sense of a number of conflict centers around the world. Now, can we possibly take a look at what happens? Let us assume, you know, the two leaders, North Korea and the U.S., decide to go ballistic. So you have that in the Korean Peninsula. Where is Iran? Because Iran still has its nuclear program, you know, not fully settled. Israel and the rest of the Middle East and the Palestinian issue is still there. Iraq is still there. And then, of course, you have terror worldwide. Can the world manage all of this, assuming something gives, as you said, by accident?
Actually, according to one academic, Richard, Rosekrans, he says, if country A has the nuclear, weapon, countries X, Y, Z should also have. In other words, he's an advocate of nuclear multipolarity. All states should have. Otherwise, we should have the clout or the guts to disarm ourselves, either unilaterally or comprehensively, all states doing it at the same time. So the world has really become a very dangerous place. Like you mentioned, Iran, having the possibility of Iraq going back. That is a big, possibility. So very, very, difficult, to say. We are just in the human, jungle, and as they say, man is wolf to man. Thomas Hobbes, Homo homine lupus est. Man will continue to prey on his fellow man. That's the realist, point of view. It's a very dangerous world in which, we live, and we have to accept that,
Okay.
All right, Kingsley, let's at least on the home stretch now. Professor Dokubo, now there are also concerns about crossing the red lines from both sides, and the aspect to everyone's position this morning is to see where not to go. Where are some of these areas to actually look into in both countries, actually, beyond the fury, beyond the threat, beyond the big words that have been used across both countries?
Donald Trump said he was drawing no red lines. He said so. He was drawing no red lines this time. But he was going to retaliate if there was any attempt, in terms of the pronouncements of this North Korean leader. He was not going to accept it that America has been threatened for so long by this regime. But be that as it may, those who are behind the nuclear institutions and all that, they know that this is not something you just fire and then just drop and just like anything. Even if you start with a conventional attack on these installations and all that, they are not going to use conventional attack. They are going to use nuclear weapons to protect their own territory and regime. So one has to be careful. It's not that you can have, in those days in Europe, they used to talk about limited nuclear war. Where will that war be fought? Where will you have the theater of war? Is it not in these regions, South Korea and Japan and all that? Are these nations ready to be used as theaters of limited nuclear war? It's not going to be possible. I think prudence will give good reasoning will take place over all what they've said. And I believe that North Korea and the United States will still come to agreement. There must be a means, an avenue to pursue discussions. You cannot isolate, marginalize, and ostracize them and believe that you're going to wish them away with your talks and all that. They are there to stay. They've acquired this weapon. Other countries have acquired. You impose sanctions. Later you withdrew. You became their partners in progress and all that. So we know that there are no hard lines. There are no barriers that have been built. If North Korea is accepted into the Committee of Nations. And then we must also understand that the West should not impose its view of what they call democracy on other countries. Democracy is a very long road with access and exits. Nations pick what they like, and others do whatever they think, and also refer to it as democracy. We just have to be careful. We cannot make the world, or the United States cannot make the world in their own image and likeness. These are countries that have adopted a particular type of administration. You leave them to do their own way, in as much as they live within the confines of international respectability. That's what I'll say.
Professor Dokubo, just before we return to Ambassador Keshi, in the past, there were all kinds of reports as to the effectiveness of sanctions on North Korea. There were photographs shown of malnourished children, photographs shown of apparent poverty and distress. And yet, years later, North Korea, when you see them, their weapons usually on parade are glistening in the sun, and the leader is proceeding with his armament program. So what exactly, this latest round of sanctions, will they be effective, considering also that there are always sanctions busters wherever they've been imposed?
Thank you for saying that. I think you might have signed the UN sanctions proposal or resolutions, but will countries like China totally adhere to it? Their interests will be hurt if they do. And also other countries, Russia and all that, they will still support this clandestinely. So definitely, you cannot, unless you have what we call a comprehensive sanction. Sanction takes a very long time, especially when it is in what we could refer to as smart sanctions on individual things and all that. People will still survive and live because this country has gone through hell and they're back. You cannot totally shut them off. China will not allow North Korea to collapse. We should bear that in mind. Whatever the agreement, the United States will have with China, they cannot force the hands of the North Koreans. And China will be happy that North Korea is there because for them, it's a very reliable buffer, which before you can crush them, the Chinese will also raise up and then fight against you. So we have to be careful. Sanctions are sanctions. Like you mentioned, sanction Boston. We talked about South Africa. When the international community has sanctions against South Africa, you have what the Nigerian oil was still going to South Africa. So we just have to be careful, because some of this rhetoric and some of these impositions that have been made at the UN, not every country on that table will accept it the way it has been written out, and they will do it their own way. We just have to bear that in mind. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Ambassador Joe Keshi?
Well, yes, he's right. Over the years, the North Koreans have actually improved their economy tremendously. I think there was there was a report some time ago, not too long ago, of how they built about 10 or 15 skyscrapers within a period of 6 months, you know, in order to provide housing for some of its citizens. And right now, this is a period, from what I've read recently, this is a period in which they collect, they harvest, and then in about 2 months' time, they begin to distribute food to, you know, throughout the whole country. So they're becoming more, you know, more prosperous. But let me just make one last point, which is why I take the position that we need to watch these events, but we also need to sleep with our 2 eyes open. The Americans, immediately after the president made its fire and fury statement, the American Defense Intelligence, you know, almost all the agencies indicated that there's no evidence on the ground that the North Koreans are preparing anything at all. Now, the Americans can spy and, can overfly and see if there are any efforts being made to strike anywhere at all, to launch any attack. As of today, there is nothing on the ground. So what we are seeing is rhetorics from 2 determined, boastful characters, and it's all leading towards one place, the negotiating table.
Does that in any way explain, I know you said you were making your last statement, the apparent quietness or apparent indifference of another major power, in this case Russia?
Oh, the Russians are the happiest in this situation. The Russians are enjoying the whole thing, because for once at least, focus have shifted away from Russia, both in the United States and everywhere in the world. I mean, is it not interesting that only a few months ago, almost every analyst in the United States was describing Russia as America's #1 enemy. Today they've shifted to say North Korea is the greatest. So the Americans, the Russians are happy. They are watching this, and as far as they are concerned, the longer, the better for them anyway. So all eyes away from Russia and now to North Korea.
All right, that's as much we can take. Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Q. Bob Manuel, thanks a lot for your insights into our conversation this morning.
Thanks very much.
All right, and then Professor Charles Dokubo of NIA, that's the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, and also a specialist in nuclear proliferation, among other areas of research. Thanks a lot for being with us. We joined us from our Lagos Network Studios. Thanks for having me. That does it for our second discussion segment on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's go over now to the world of sports.
The Super Eagles of Nigeria have climbed one place to 38th position in the